Hello friends, I'm Chadwick Harvey and this is Faithful Performance. We explore the testimony of the biblical prophets and how they perfectly correlate with the current events of today. Thank you for joining us. Friends, in this episode we're going to start a new series on my second book. It's going to be a 10-part video series on my second book that I wrote, God's Fishermen, Satan's Hunters, the unspoken biblical prophecy that is terrorizing the world. I've been wanting to do this video series for some time now, and I believe this is the right time now to do it. So I hope you will join us as we embark on this journey of this prophecy that I believe is really unspoken in the prophecy world, but we're going to try to bring it to light and to give this information out. So it's a very important prophecy. As you guys know who keep up with our ministry, we deal with the biblical prophecies for the end of the age. Of course, certainly I believe we are living at the end of the age. This is not to set any kind of dates or whatever. We just have to follow the prophecies, if you will. But this prophecy is no different. We can see the escalation and the intensification of this prophecy as we look at the Middle East, North Africa, Europe, and also when we look at the shores of America as well. This prophecy has continued to escalate in my personal opinion. So we're going to go through this prophecy. I wanted to give a summary or an introduction before we get into the meat of the book, if you will. But we have to remember that Israel it's a central Israel book, the Holy Bible is. We have to understand it's Israel first, and then we have the surrounding nations, the immediate surrounding nations, and then we have the other nations around. It's kind of like a bullseye board, if you will. We got Israel as the center bullseye, the surrounding nations, and then we have the other nations of America, Britain, Europe, etc. So it's important to understand that the Holy Bible is Israel-centric, and it is God's prophetic timeline, is Israel and the Jewish people. We have to remember that when we look at all of these prophecies, that it's Israel-centric first, the Jewish people first, and then the surrounding nations. So we have to understand God's prophetic timeline deals with those things, and we've discussed this in other videos, but it goes back to 1948 when Israel was born again. And then we've had this Aliyah, this return of the Jewish people since that time. And then we had 1967 when they recaptured Jerusalem as their capital. So these are three important markers for the end of the age. Just like Messiah said himself, he was proclaiming to the Jewish people that they would see him no more until they say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." So we have to understand that Israel and the Jewish people are very important to watch, the return of the Jewish people. And this prophecy that we're about to proclaim, it deals with the Aliyah, or the return of the Jewish people. But we had to have certain things happen before that return could take place, and that goes into the prophecy. So we wanted to give an introduction to this prophecy. We're going to go through two of the main components of the book, which is, in summary, which is God's fishermen and Satan's hunters, the prophecy itself in Jeremiah 16. And then we'll go through, in summary, the everlasting covenants. As you guys know, there are three main things, I believe, that are very important for all believers to understand. Number one is the everlasting covenants, which is the Abrahamic, the Davidic, and the New Covenant, God's plan of salvation. And then we have God's calendar, and then also the feast days. If we understand those three things, all of these prophecies, including the book of Revelation, will make a lot more sense when we understand those three foundational keys to the Holy Bible. So we'd like to proclaim this prophecy right now in summary, and then also we'll talk about the everlasting covenants and give an outline of what we will be discussing in this 10-part series. In Jeremiah 16, 14 through 17, it says this: "Therefore, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that it shall no more be said, the Lord lives who brought up the children of Israel from the land of Egypt, but the Lord lives who brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north, and from all the lands where he has driven them. For I will bring them back into their land which I gave to their fathers." So Jeremiah prophesies this in his book, and this is, in my opinion, an end of the age prophecy. We'll go through this prophecy in more detail in the second video of this series, the second of the 10 videos. But when he says that no longer will he be called the God who brought him out of Egypt, but the one who brought him out of all the lands, he's basically telling us there's going to be a greater exodus, okay, from the world than there was from Egypt. In the book of Exodus, in Exodus 12:37, it tells us that 600,000 men on foot left Egypt. Now, this didn't include the children of the women, but it tells us an understanding there's about 600,000 men. Well, since 1948, there's been 4 million people return from the nations to Israel. Okay, so it's already been a greater exodus from the nations, just like the prophecy has stated, than the one from Egypt already. So we're going to get into more details about that when we get into that certain video, but it tells us right now that this prophecy has started to escalate and intensify since 1948, with approximately 4 million Jewish people making Aliyah, or returning back to Israel, just like the prophecy says. Okay, so then it also tells us he's going to give them the land of the fathers. Well, that goes back into the everlasting covenants. Okay, so that's why it's important, these everlasting covenants. Jeremiah wrote this prophecy because of the everlasting covenants, the Abrahamic, the Davidic, and the new covenant ultimately. So that's why he wrote this prophecy, because of the promise of the Abrahamic covenant. Okay, so we have to understand where Jeremiah is coming from. And he says, hey, there's going to be an exodus from the nations because to inherit the land. Okay, and we're seeing that today when we look at the state of Israel. Okay, so then when we look at the population of the Jewish people, when we look at America, there's 6 to 7 million Jewish people. It depends on the estimates, but I'm just giving you an approximation of it. There's about 6 or 7 million Jewish people that live in America, over 1 million, if you will, in Europe. I'm just speaking about those two main continents because that's where the majority of the Jewish people are, besides Israel. Okay, so I go through the book with that, with Europe and also with America, because again, the majority besides Israel is in those two continents. And we have to understand that to deal with this prophecy. This is why he wrote it. We're seeing the Aliyah now. We're going to go through the statistics of this in Europe and also with America, and the cause of that, which is the prophecy. So he mentions this prophecy. There's going to be a greater exodus, okay, from the nations than there was from Egypt. We're seeing that now. But then he tells us how he's going to do it. The God Almighty, how he is going to do this. He tells us how he's going to bring them back into the land. So in verse 16 it says, "Behold, I will send for many fishermen, says the Lord, and they shall fish them. And afterward I will send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain, every hill, and out of all the holes of the rocks. For my eyes are on all their ways. They are not hidden from my face, nor is their iniquity hidden from my eyes." So this is a very sobering prophecy at the end of it, okay? He's going to send the fishermen first, okay? So I want to be clear, we are all fishermen who believe in Yeshua, Jesus, okay? Matthew 4:19, we're all fishermen. But I'm speaking of the specific prophecy in Jeremiah as he would understand it about who the fishermen were. Well, the fishermen are going to fish their people back, the children of Israel, the Jewish people. Well, the Jewish people are going to fish their own people back. And when you look at 1948, since that time, you had the Jewish Agency, the World Zionist Organization. I've got a friend over there, the Aliyah Return Center. He's a fisherman. Again, this is based on the prophecy of Jeremiah, not really about we're all fishermen of the gospel. That this is dealing with the covenants. This is dealing with the Abrahamic covenant. The Jewish people will fish their own people back, and we're going to get into more details and evidence of that. And of course, we can all be a part of that. I was born a Gentile, and I can support that. I can support the Aliyah or the return, but the Jewish people are going to fish their own people back, which we're seeing right now. So then after the fishermen are released, there's going to be a certain period of time between the fishermen and the hunters, and now we're seeing the hunters hunt or provoke the Jewish people back. When we look at Europe, when we start looking at some of the things in America that's going on, they're starting to look at Africa. We're seeing the provoking of the Jewish people back to the promised land, just like this prophecy states. We're going to get into more detail on the certain video of this, but just to give the foundation. So we're seeing this prophecy gain speed. It's escalating, it's intensifying. As we see really in 2014 and 2015, we saw another escalation, which we'll get into as well. So this prophecy is really, like I said before, is really not spoken about in the prophecy world where I'm in, so to speak. We deal with Daniel, we deal with Revelation, we deal with Isaiah, other prophecies in Jeremiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, etc. But this prophecy in Jeremiah 16, the fisherman and the hunter's prophecy, as I call it, it's really not spoken about. And I believe we need to really understand this because it can really detail about what's going on in the world. And I wanted to mention before we move forward is we have to understand in Romans 11:28 through 29, Paul tells us that even though the nation of Israel, the corporation, as a whole, Israel is against the gospel, the Jewish people are, there is a remnant still, okay? I've got plenty of friends who are Messianic or Jewish believers that love the Lord, but as a nation, they will not come to salvation until the end of the age when they say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord through the time of Jacob's trouble," which is the 7-year tribulation period, etc. But I wanted to make it clear, they're still the elect, okay? Paul tells us in Romans 11:28 through 29 that even though they're enemies of the gospel at the current time as a nation, they're still the elect because of the everlasting covenants, and these gifts are irrevocable. Okay, they're unconditional. Okay, they're unilateral. Okay, only God Himself is going to do this. So it didn't depend on Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, or even the Jewish people today. They are the elect because of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and David, and we will get into those next week with the everlasting covenants. So it's important to understand that we have to understand that they are the elect, they are the fishermen of their own people, okay, to bring them back into the land, and eventually as a nation they will say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." They will be His people, He will be their God, like Ezekiel 36 says, Jeremiah 31, etc. So we really have to understand that. But this prophecy, the fisherman and the hunter's prophecy, it is a right now prophecy, just like prophecies in Daniel, just like other prophecies that we've dealt with on our ministry, on these videos. This is a right now prophecy. We're seeing this come into fruition, escalating, intensifying, and this prophecy will explain, I believe, when I show you the facts in these videos, this prophecy will help explain the terrorism. It will explain the proxy wars. It will explain these things that ultimately come against the Jewish people to provoke them back home, okay? So again, it's a very sobering prophecy, and I want to make it very clear that I love the God of Israel, who is Yeshua. He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and David. I love the Jewish people, whether they're saved or not saved. I love the Jewish people. I love all of mankind. But this is a sobering prophecy, and I want to make it very clear. I'm trying to be very careful with it so people don't take it out of context. Okay, I'm not proclaiming anything other than I'm trying to get this prophecy out there to understand that what's going on. And make no mistake, as we will see, the hunters will go against the Christians as well. So it's not just about the Jewish people, even though this prophecy states it is for the Jewish people. The terrorism, the proxy wars will come against the believers in Messiah, as well as we see in the book of Revelation as well, that Satan goes against the offspring of the woman, okay, other than the Jewish people, which is the believers, the Christians, if you will. So I wanted to make that very clear that I'm being very responsible with this. I love the Jewish people, but this prophecy states that there will be an Aliyah back home to the covenants, because of the covenants to Israel, and we have to understand that this is a prophecy that will come to fruition, and we're starting to see that come right now, even on the shores of America. Okay, so this Jeremiah's prophecy will explain this cloud of war, this cloud of terrorism that has covered the earth, and I believe you will only see that intensify and escalate, just like all of the biblical prophets have pronounced, including Messiah in Matthew 24. It's only going to get worse before it gets better. That's why we all want the King to return. And the whole point of my ministry is to bring these prophecies to light, and you can do what you want to with them and pray about them. But the ultimate goal and the ultimate vision is to have the King return for His second coming so we can live throughout the millennial kingdom. That's the whole point of all of these prophecies. That's what Jeremiah, his hope was for. Isaiah, Ezekiel, all of the prophets is that hope. The disciples is that restoration of the kingdom of Israel in Acts 1 by Yeshua, Jesus, the Mashiach, the Messiah of Israel and of the world. Okay? So now let's transition into the foundation part of the book. You know that like I said before, the everlasting covenants, it's the foundation with the feast days, with the calendar. If you understand those three things, everything will make better sense when you're dealing with the prophecies, including the book of Revelation. So we have to understand that the everlasting covenants, they're everlasting, and we're going to get into detail of these, very big detail about these covenants in next week's video. It's going to start off with the covenants, and then we'll get into the prophecy, and then we'll go on forward, and I'll give you the outline at the end here. But the everlasting covenants are very important to understand theologically, your foundation, to understand how God aligned his plan of salvation. It's his plan of salvation for Jews and Gentiles. Okay, the Abrahamic covenant, the Davidic covenant, the new covenant, how they work together, they build and extend upon each other. Okay, and as we know, Jesus, Yeshua, is the new covenant. We're saved under the blood of the new covenant, but we're not living in the new covenant, and we will discuss that. We will be living in the new covenant when he returns for his second coming and throughout his millennial kingdom. But God had this plan of salvation from the very beginning, and you can even go back into the Garden of Eden, okay, in Genesis 3:15, where there's going to be a seed that crushes the serpent's head, a seed that crushes Satan's head. We know that's going to be Jesus, and he's going to crush him. Okay, so that seed is going to be the same seed in the Abrahamic covenant, the same seed in the Davidic covenant, the fruit of David's loins, and he is the new covenant. And we're going to go through those again next week in great detail and show you the scriptures that align to that. But it's important to have our theology right, number one, but number two, to see how all these things keep aligning. And even in Matthew 1, it says Jesus is the son of Abraham, the son of David. Well, he's carrying you back to the prophets. He wrote it for a certain reason like that, okay, that go back to the covenants, the son of Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant, the seed of Abraham, the seed. Okay, it was carried through the pure royal lineage of Isaac and Jacob and through David, but it's still the seed is Jesus, Yeshua, of the Abrahamic covenant, the seed of the Davidic covenant. That's why in Matthew 1 we find that, the son of Abraham, the son of David. And it's important for us to understand that. It's important to understand that, just like we discussed before, that Israel is the centerpiece. It is Israel-centric. The Holy Bible is Israel-centric, Jerusalem-centric especially, and then the surrounding nations, and then the other nations. And we have to understand that it's literally, geographically and metaphysically, the center of the universe. You can do your research on that. It's pretty phenomenal. And we just have to understand that. And why is that? Is because of the everlasting covenants. That's where God put his name in Jerusalem, Abrahamic, Davidic, New Covenant, in Jerusalem, not America, not Rome, not anywhere else. He specifically put his name and his covenants in Jerusalem, in Israel. His promised land, his holy land will be in Israel. Okay, and I'm not bashing America. Of course, we're a light. Well, God's had his hand upon America, and he will continue to, good and bad, if you will, but he will continue to have his hand upon America, upon Rome, and everywhere. So I'm not meaning that in any kind of way, except to make the point that his name is in Jerusalem. His name is in Israel. With the everlasting covenants, he will return to Israel, okay, through Egypt, the Exodus route, and he will put his feet on the Mount of Olives, not anywhere else, okay? So we have to understand that that's where the Holy Bible's focus is. And Benjamin Disraeli famously declared this, and I thought this was very interesting, that the view of Jerusalem is the history of the world. It is more. It is the history of earth and heaven. I mean, this is what it's all about. This is where the battle lines have been drawn, is the everlasting covenants in Jerusalem. Satan wants to go against them, and God's going to fulfill them. There's where your war is. Look at what's going on today in the Middle East. That's where it all stems from, is the Abrahamic covenant, and we're going to get into that. So we have to understand in the scriptures, in Zechariah 2:8, it says that the Jewish people in Israel is the apple of God's eye. I mean, man, that's pretty strong language for us to understand. The apple of God's eye. I mean, that is true love, okay, that he has for his covenants, his people, and his promised land, his heritage. Okay, so I tell people all the time that Israel and the Jewish people are the most physical evidence on earth that the God of Israel is alive and well, and he is the dominant God. Of course he is. Okay, he's a truth teller. Okay, he cannot lie. But Israel and the Jewish people is a phenomenon, if you will, because by any worldly standards, they should not be even around right now. But again, it goes back into the everlasting covenants, okay? So many empires have come against them to try to obliterate them, but they are still here, and those empires, the Babylonian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, the Romans, the Germans, the Ottomans, etc., the Philistines, they're all gone. They're all wiped away. But the God of Israel has preserved his people, and preserved his heritage, his land, because of his holy name that we find, and he will continue to do so. So Israel and the Jewish people are the most physical proof that the God of Israel exists, and he's alive and well. Yeshua sitting at the right hand of the Father, and as we know, Yeshua, Jesus, he is the ultimate fisherman, okay? So he's the ultimate fisherman for all of us. Just like we find in Matthew 4:19, he will make us great fishermen of men. But again, he's the great fisherman, he's the ultimate fisherman, and then we have the adversary. Okay, we have the adversary of Satan. Okay, he's wanting to come against God's people. He wants to come against the everlasting covenants. That's what the battle's about, is the deed to the land. If Satan can prove that God is not going to fulfill these everlasting covenants, then he wins. Of course, he's not going to be able to do that. God will win. Yeshua will win. He's the king, and he's going to crush the serpent's head. But that's Satan's mindset. He's trying to prove that God's a liar, if you will. Of course, he's not. He's a truth teller. He cannot lie. But we have to understand that's where the battle lines have been drawn, is the everlasting covenants, because of the reasons we just mentioned. And Satan knows these prophecies better than all of us. Okay, he knows his demise in Revelation 20. He understands he's going to be crushed, but his pride, his ego, his rebellion, it's kind of like when all of us, before I was born again, I knew I was going into the depths of hell, if you will, the pit of hell, until God pulled me out. Okay, well, he knows that as well. He knows his destruction is coming, but his pride, his ego will allow him to try to come against God's covenants, God's people, and then he will be crushed. Just like Genesis 3:15 says that he will be crushed, but he is the father of lies, Satan is, okay? And he has always raised up a specific hunter, okay, for the everlasting covenants, and we're going to get into this. It's pretty phenomenal, but he's always raised a hunter to try to forbid that covenant being made. He tried to wipe them out. You can think of it like even Jesus. You know, he tried to wipe out Jesus as a young baby. We're going to get into all of these scriptures and these extra biblical sources that prove that he's always come against the covenant people. Okay, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, even like I said, just with Yeshua as well. He's always tried to forbid these everlasting covenants, because that's what the battle line is these everlasting covenants that God is going to fulfill, that Yeshua is going to come down and fulfill the Abrahamic, the Davidic, the new covenant, and then crush the serpent's head after that. So we have to understand that he's the father of lies. John 8:44, he's a murderer from the beginning. Okay, so he's wanting to kind of derail and forbid the everlasting covenants from even being from the beginning, okay, with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and David. He didn't even want them to be established, because he knows his demise is coming. So this is the generational war that we are seeing, and when we're going to prove that through the scriptures and some extra biblical sources, that this is the battle. This is what the battle is about, is the Abrahamic covenant, which the Davidic covenant extends upon that, and then the new covenant extends upon those two covenants, okay? And we're going to put those together in next week's video. So I wanted to bring this to light, and it's very important as we look at it. Like I said, the everlasting covenants is so important for us to understand, because even in a prophetic understanding, but also personally in our theology, we need to understand that we're grafted in. I'm born a Gentile, but I'm grafted into the commonwealth of Israel. Ephesians 2, Galatians 3, if you're a seed of Christ, you're a seed of Abraham. Okay, speaking to the Gentiles. Okay, that's Galatians 3, 26 through 29. Ephesians 2, 11 through 13, the commonwealth of Israel. Okay, and then also Romans 11. We're grafted in to the tree. The Jews are grafted in too, okay? So we're all grafted into the Israel of God, okay? So we are all Israel, and we have to look at that. So the primary reason that Jeremiah spoke this prophecy, going back to God's fishermen, Satan's hunters, is because of the everlasting covenants, because God has put his name in Jerusalem. That's where he dwells, according to the book of Joel as well. And it's incredible when we speak about the Jewish people in Israel that Winston Churchill, I'll give you a quote of what Winston Churchill said, that no thoughtful man can doubt the fact that the Jewish people are beyond all question the most formidable and most remarkable race which has appeared in the world. Okay, and some might take offense to that, you know, but at the same time, it's true, because the everlasting covenants, God's promises to his people, he chose Israel. He chose the Jewish people to be a light to the nations. That's the bottom line, according to the scriptures. So we have to understand that. Of course they are. Of course they're the most remarkable race. Of course they're the most formidable, because of God's everlasting covenants, okay, because of what he has admonished them to do for him, to be a light to the world, to be a light to the Gentiles. Now, of course, they weren't that. Of course, the Gentiles aren't that to them as well right now. So we have both failed the Lord, the Jews and the Gentiles, if you will, the born Gentiles. But we need to all put our egos down, our pride down, and come together through Yeshua to be one new body, one new man, and to be the light of the world to the rest of the Gentile world until the Messiah returns. And then he's the ultimate light. He's the light of the world, but he wants us to be the light as well, just like he proclaimed in the Gospels. So we have to understand we're going to go on this great embarkment of this journey with God's fishermen, Satan's hunters, Jeremiah 16, also the everlasting covenants, but also want to give you an outline of the book. This is what we're going to go chapter by chapter. If you haven't received the book, I can email you the book for free. Okay, it'll be digitally. Okay, it'll be kind of like an ebook, but you can also order it online if you want a paperback copy. I don't have any paperback copies with me, but you can also order it online. But I can send you that for free. Okay, the book as well. We will be going chapter by chapter. Okay, first with the everlasting covenants, which we just kind of gave a summary of. We're going to go in great detail with the scriptures of the Abrahamic covenant, the Davidic covenant, the new covenant, how they work together. And then we're going to go into great detail about this prophecy of Jeremiah 16. Again, Jeremiah wrote it because of the everlasting covenant. So we have to have the foundation of the covenants, and then we go to the prophecy of Jeremiah 16. Okay, and then we'll see who God's original fishermen were. Okay, and then who his original hunters were. Okay, so if we understand who the original fishermen and the original hunters, Isaiah 46, 9 through 10 says the end will be like the beginning, and from ancient times not yet fulfilled. So if we understand who the original fishermen were and the original hunters, then we'll understand who the end of the age fishermen are, the end of the age hunters are. And then we're going to get into the mystery of Aliyah, or the return of the Jewish people. We're going to go through some of the celestial bodies in the sky, the blood moons that has fallen on the Lord's feast days throughout history, and it will prove that there's always been a migration and ultimately a Aliyah, a return of the Jewish people through certain dates that we'll go through as well. And then we'll understand the Aliyah that we've seen here recently in 2014 and 2015 from Europe, okay? What's happened over there with the war, or not the war, but the terrorism that has escalated over there. And then we'll talk about the Aliyah from the United States, that what we're starting to see, the very beginning of this Aliyah that we're starting to see in the United States because of the climate and the environment of the anti-Semitism that is going on over here. And then we'll speak about Satan's final hunter, which obviously you can probably understand that is the Antichrist that we'll talk about. That's going to go into Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8. We will proclaim who he is from the area that he will be rising from according to the scriptures, and we'll go into great detail with that. And then also we'll close with the conclusion of the time of Jacob's trouble, which is the 7-year tribulation period, and the importance of understanding that in the proper context. So friends, I hope you will join us on this journey. It's going to be an outstanding journey. I'm excited about it. This book was written or published in 2018. It was actually a chapter in my first book, God's Prophetic Timeline, and then we decided to take that chapter of 5,000 words to turn it into an 80,000 word book because of what we believed was going on in the world with all the facts. So we're going to get into some factual evidence of this, some statistics, some maps to show the Aliyah, show the terrorism, show all of these things, because as we know, the Middle East has exploded in terrorism, North Africa, also we're seeing it in Europe, and we've started to see a little bit of that throughout the years in America as well. So I hope you will join us on this journey and give clarity to this, to pray about this prophecy, to pray for the Jewish people, to pray for the believers as well, because again, it's going to affect all of us. Even though the prophecy was written for the Jewish people, it's going to affect all of us with the terrorism and things like that. So I hope you will join us on this journey as we go forward with this. We will start with the everlasting covenants, and then we'll take off from there. As always, friends, until next time, may God bless you, may he keep you, may his face shine upon you and give you his grace. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you his everlasting shalom. My name is Chadwick Harvey, and you've reached Faithful Performance.